Welcome to Legacy Driven Marriages Podcast, episode number 43. I'm Walt McKinley, and I am here with my beautiful wife and my partner in crime, my co-host, Stephanie McKinley.
Oh, hey, everybody.
Look, we love that you guys are here. So please, as we get started, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel inclined and if you feel called to share this out with somebody that you know, please make sure you do so. Look, we cannot create a movement of building powerful marriages without your help. It's literally going to take all of us. So please share this out. Today, we're talking about something that destroys more relationships than anything else that I can think of. Something that really just led to almost catastrophic results for Stephanie and I, and something that will creep up on you in your relationship where you feel like all of a sudden it's over out of nowhere. But if you do some self-reflection and you really look back, you'll see how the expectations, we all got them, the expectations have just crushed your relationship over the course of time. I mean, this is real, you guys. This is as raw as it gets. This is something Stephanie and I, even today, talking about marriages and talking about how to build powerful marriages, we have to be uber intentional because expectations just show up. And when they're unmet, when you don't know how to handle them, when you're not having conversations, they will be the thing that will cause catastrophic results in your relationship and be something that leads you to a divorce and a heartbeat. And so we're going to dig into this and give you, as always, some super tangible things. We've got 3 key points we're going to talk about today to give you something to take away that you can start utilizing today, right after this podcast. So if you've got a pen and pencil, make sure that you write this down. If you don't, you can always re-listen to this episode. But I promise you, if you adjust your expectations and do the things we're going to talk about today, you will transform your relationship because we did it for ourselves.
Yeah, you guys, Walt and I are very passionate about this topic. We've covered it several times. We found that it was something that, reflecting back on our own relationship, was one of the things that really got us to the point where it was almost the demise of the relationship. We didn't recognize it at that time. It's hard to see when you're, you're in that dark place, but looking back, if you trace it back, you'll see a lot of times if you're feeling a lot of resentment towards your spouse and you trace it back, it'll go back to expectations. Expectations come in many different forms. I mean, it can be your own expectations of yourself. It can be the expectations you think your spouse should have. It can be things you brought from your childhood. It comes from all different places, but ultimately we all have them, like he said, and we bring them into the relationship. And we heard a statement the other day that really stuck with us.
Yeah. It was one of those statements where somebody said it and we're like, ooh, we got to write that one down. That's super good.
And it is that expectations are resentments waiting to happen. And resentment is the silent killer of most relationships. And I wanted to pause there because that statement is so deep. When you've lived it, you know exactly what that statement means. And it's so true. Like I said, if you're really realizing that are you feeling a lot of resentment toward your spouse, think back and trace it back because it's probably an expectation you're having of them. And then you have to ask yourself, is it realistic?
Well, I think if you really think about it, these unmet expectations that we all have, and they affect every one of our relationships, but these unmet and, more importantly, unspoken expectations can and do lead to conflict. But if you're intentional and you do some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, they can be the greatest opportunity in your relationship to bring you and your spouse together as one. And frankly, elevate your relationship and help you create something extraordinary that lasts the rest of your life. These tools we're going to give, this first one we're going to talk about today on recognizing your expectations, are profound in the impact that they will have for you, have for your spouse if they're willing to listen to this episode today, and more importantly, have on your relationship. And that's going to affect your kids and everybody else around you too. So this is a really cool topic to talk about, and why we've done this for the third time, because you can't have these conversations enough. Frankly, it's both of them were two of our downloaded most episodes. And the most requested episode is expectations and how do you really deal with them in your relationship. So let's kick it off by really just talking about, how do you even recognize what the hell your expectations even are?
Right. And so I just kind of mentioned that a little bit. You can kind of, I know for me, growing up, the way watching my parents, they modeled for me what it kind of showed me what I should expect from a marriage, right? That's what a lot of us, whatever we grew up with, is kind of what we end up expecting. Now, for some of us, like Walt, he didn't necessarily get the example that he wanted, so he learned what not to do.
Yeah, I had the example of what I needed to do the opposite of in my childhood. And it's funny, Steph, because I don't think people even attribute their expectations to the experiences that they've already lived, to the hurts and the pains, or the positive things even that's formed how they go about day-to-day life.
And it's not even that. It's like books we read, things we watch on TV, other couples that we see. I know when we were growing up, there were tons of television shows. It was all like family shows, Um, I'm trying to think of what the like Growing Pains
Oh, they
and
had Cosby Show, they had Full
well,
House. I
there
mean,
were, there were so many family shows that showed you this dynamic that a household should look like. And so I think a lot of us come into our marriage thinking that's how it's going to be. And we also get sold on, at least for little girls, mostly. I don't know how much boys are really reading fairy tales, but girls, it's always, they're talking about the princess and the prince who comes to save her, and they live happily ever after. And that's what we go into marriage thinking it's going to be like. Oh, I met my Prince Charming and now he's going to save me and we're just going to live this beautiful, perfect life. And yeah, that's not reality.
yeah, boys are more playing GI Joe and fighting for justice and fighting for the girl and protecting their land. And it's definitely a different dynamic, just from a cultural gender perspective of how we're raised, that lead into what we're supposed to do as adults. I mean, men, it's still the same thing that we learned as little boys. Our charter is to provide and protect, not even ourselves, but our family. And so that we put so much weight on whether or not we're providing or protecting, like our own expectations on ourselves. And I think that this is really important when you recognize your expectations. Where do you and your spouse have different expectations of your relationship?
Mhm.
And then where do you have your own expectations of your personal life and what you expect from yourself? Because both of those there's some overlap there, but also from just how we feel about ourselves and how we show up in our relationship, it's important to do some self-reflection on, what do I expect from myself? And am I falling short of what those expectations that I have for myself are? And how is that affecting my relationships? And how is it affecting me?
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about just culturally how we've changed too. Like, I grew up in a very traditional household where my dad went to work, my mom stayed at home with the kids, and my mom did the home housework, and that's kind of how it went. And so I got that example. But I know a lot of you out there have a single parent, and some of you are only living with the mom or only living with a dad, or that's kind of how Walt grew up, and or going between different, he didn't have the same consistent household even. And I know there's a lot of you out there like that too. So, you know, you have these two different people coming from two different, ways that they were raised, and then that bleeds into everything. I mean, how you think children are, how you should raise your children, how they should be disciplined, how the house is going to be run, who goes to work, who stays at home. All these things come into play, and you're going to have different views on how that should go. I meet a lot of women who they were raised by a single mom and sometimes a very strong woman. And so they feel like they should be leading the household. And there's a lot of men who still don't see that for women. And so there's a lot of conflict here, even just to start. And we have to start recognizing that's the kind of stuff, the kind of conversation you got to have when you start in your relationship is what is the things that you're expecting when you start moving forward in this relationship? And you'll start figuring it out pretty fast, because I know Walt and I, as soon as we moved in, man, I had differing expectations on how the house was going to be kept. That's for sure. So I was like nagging him about why he wasn't picking up this or cleaning that dish after himself or whatever. And
fluffing the pillow on the couch the right way,
and let me tell you, it led to some arguments, and he's like, stop, you're not my mom. And, so you start running into this stuff very quickly. And even we were talking about like how much sex you're going to have in your relationship. The man is definitely coming into that with a certain expectation. And even for some women, I know this, I don't want to totally,
we'll say the high sex drive person,
right.
but 8 times out of 10, it's the guy.
Right. At least that's what it seems like.
If you talk to most married couples, they'll tell you that.
But men come in. I'll let you talk about this one because I know you have a different expectation.
Well, I think that first ask yourself, what expectations do I feel like aren't being met? What's my expectations when I walk in the door from work? If your wife beats you home, if she's working, or if your wife stays at home, do you expect like your kids to run up to you and your dog to run up to you? And it's this Hallmark movie and she's super freshened up and she's got dinner cooking on the stove and baby, how are you doing? And I just love you. And thank you so much for working so hard for our family. Like, do you have this massive expectation of even just walking through the door of your home and what that's going to look like? Do you have expectations for how you're going to spend the weekend? Maybe you want to go fishing and your spouse wants to go shopping. And there's a conflict there because how you want to spend the weekend looks different. Maybe one of you wants to relax and one of you don't want to relax because they've been in the house all week. Like Stephanie said, how's the house going to be kept?
And that was different for us too, because I was at home and he went to work. And so I tried to do everything during the week so that we could have our weekends to get out and do stuff. And sometimes he just wanted to relax. So we had some differing things there on.
Right. And that's not even necessarily like how you grew up. That's just our experiences in that time and place in that season of our life too, that affected our need to get out. And typically I'm the one who really needs to get out of the house. And it really affects my mental health negatively if I feel stuck in the house. And so, but what are you going to eat for dinner? What time is dinner going to be done? These are the things that you need to ask yourself. How much of that leans into my expectations and how is that really affecting my relationship? Also for yourself, am I going to get promoted? Why didn't I get promoted? Am I not working hard enough? Hey, how come my teenage daughters want to hang out with mom and not hang out with me as the dad now? And you don't feel as worthy or you can't connect with them as much, but you want to be this great dad. And I'm talking a little fast when I'm saying this because this is how our minds work and you just spin out of control. And then you start suffering and living in quiet desperation when really if you just peeled away these expectations that you have on yourself and have on your spouse and you started showing up in a different way, we're going to talk about the very last thing is like, how do we handle these expectations and what can we do to move from this point of contention and move into the possibilities of what these things can bring into your life. So hang on until the end so that you can hear a piece of that. But Steph and I, as we prep for this, we really wanted to focus on what we see most couples struggle with. There's finances, there's how you're going to parent, there's a lot of things, but sex is something that really does affect men and women differently, from the appetite from sex to what we need to do to lead up to having sex to like just a physiological need of what that looks like. And so we wanted to really unpack that just a little bit with you guys today on recognizing the expectations before we move into what is a danger of some of these unmet expectations.
So you want to talk about, we were going to give you an example of one of those expectations you're coming to the marriage with. And so we feel like this is kind of a big one, is
Sex.
And like I said, I'm going to speak for us, but I'm going to say that this in general is a lot of couples, but it can be reversed, male or female, whichever you are, the higher sex drive, lower sex drive person. I think, he comes into the relationship thinking, yes, I can have sex as much as I want, or I can have it every day, or
I mean, that's part of the perk of being married, right?
That's what they're coming in thinking is the perk of marriage.
Pretty good perk if you ask me.
I have to say, that was not my expectation. And I can't say, and the thing is too, when you're new love, it's a lot different because yeah, everything is so, you're so into each other and it is happening a lot. And that's partly because you're fulfilling each other's needs and expectations at that point.
Well, it's new and it's exciting, and
Right.
you don't live together typically yet, so you don't see each other 24/7.
So I think it happened pretty often in the beginning. And so everything was pretty good. But as you kids enter the picture and responsibilities of life and taking care of your home and working and all of those demands, at least for me, that stuff started to weigh heavily on me. And especially when we had kids, that was a huge change for me. And I went through a lot of hormonal stuff and crashes and
Well, and
that
each of those pieces of what you just said are pulling your energy that you would normally have by the end of the night, when typically it's, fun time for the parents. And you're just tired when you get to bed. Like, I just want to go to bed.
right. And I had kids, I had a baby on me all day and I was just like, I don't want anyone else touching me. Like
But
I just
but before we started this, Steph, you were really kind of unpacking with me as we were talking about what we're going to talk about, just the difference between
I'm
80
gonna
the
yeah, I'm
80%
getting to
difference
that.
between women and men. Yeah, I just want to make sure we didn't skip that because I thought it was a great point you were making about that.
Well, I'm getting there by saying like, so this is where in our relationship things started to shift a lot for that because the demands for me changed my sex drive a lot, but his sex drive didn't change. So we had we had a lot of and then our relationship started to become transactional. And because he was just trying to find a way to get it. And so it kind of became like a trading. If you do this, I'll do that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And what I realized after we had a come to Jesus moment and we were reflecting and looking at our relationship from a different point of view, and I could really look at like what did I do? And I did some research because I didn't really understand the man's sex drive like that. Because I was telling Walt before the show, like, if you go back to when we had sex ed, which was like in fifth grade when we were like 10 and you're going through puberty and they're just trying to teach you about what's happening to your body. And they separate the boys and the girls and they talk about, I don't know what they talk to the boys about, but I know for the girls, they were talking about how you're going to have a period and menstruation and how a baby is formed and all of that. But they don't really talk about the act of sex. And so I didn't really understand the need for a man. So, I had done some research and I realized that it is an actual physiological need for the man, that he does get a buildup that has to be released every few days. And this is science. This is not something they're making up. This is true need for them. And it really did change my perspective to where I was like, well, okay, I I really need to do some compromising here because I know I don't have that drive, but he does and he needs that. And so we compromise and I just made sure that those needs were met reasonable amount. I didn't think every day was reasonable for me,
Trust me, I tried.
but but I have to say that just knowing that made a big difference for me, that I didn't feel like it was just him wanting what he wanted all that, like it was unfair and he just wanted this more than I did and he wasn't willing to give on that. And it just changed how I looked at it. And so I was kind of hoping that maybe by sharing that, maybe some of you would understand too. And also for the man, understanding that, and maybe whoever's the lower sex drive, if you're the higher sex drive person, you need to understand that your partner, if they're not wanting it as much as you, don't take it personal, that a lot of times it's just because they don't feel the same need as you.
Yeah, and I think conversely, ladies, for the men, Now, sex ed class, I mean, it was seriously the basis. You're going to grow some hair. You're going to ejaculate. You're going to wake up with some morning wood. It's super nobody ever talked about the pleasure of sex. So I think for men, though, because we do have a physiological need for the release, men, if they're not getting sex, like they'll turn to porn and they'll do some other things, which there's a whole nother conversation we can have around porn and how that rewires the brain and gives you it will negatively impact your relationships altogether, but it negatively impacts you internally too, man, if you do have that addiction. And I think 25% of women is what we read are actually addicted to porn too. So men grow up and they get married and they think, oh man, I'm going to have some sex every single night. Like that's the perk of getting married. Super awesome, right? Every time I see my girlfriend or my fiance, because we haven't lived together, we have sex. So you just think it's going to be all the time when you move in together. And I think that for ladies to understand the physiological aspect of that, but I think conversely for men out there to understand women are just built differently too. And so women, they're really driven, or men are driven a lot more on the physiological need. Women are driven more on the emotional need. And so what does that emotional need look like? It's the hugging, it's the caressing, it's the soft touches, it's telling them they look beautiful. It's all of these things. It's taking some of the work off of their plate and helping out at home a little bit more. So maybe they have energy at night. It's all of these things packaged up in order to get them to the point where they're ready to. And Stephanie said, we actually had a conversation about this. Mm-hmm. What's your need? What's your need? Okay, it can't be only our need. What's our need? And how do we compromise and find an opportunity for Team McKinley to really win? And so for us, I know, and everybody's different, we settled on 2 or 3 times a week. Now, does that always happen? No, it can't be absolutely 100%. That's what it's going to be. That's very unrealistic. But we work on making that happen 2 or 3 times a week. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's to help me get a physiological need. And sometimes it's for both of us to have that. And so I think that really understanding the impact of how men and women are truly different. And again, we're speaking about the majority of the time, understanding how men and women are truly different and how our experiences have also adjusted that measuring that we do on both sides of that, and finding a compromise that really works for both of you only because you recognize what the expectation actually is.
Right. Well, and I want to say another thing that came up. We just watched something last night, and I never even heard of it. I didn't heard of this guy, the comedian Matt Rife.
Yeah,
is that his name?
We watched Matt Rife's comedy special on Netflix.
Yeah, so Walt and our daughter knew about him from TikTok videos, and so he just did a special on Netflix. Well, we watched it. Well, Walt kind of knew what to expect, and he warned us about. And I was pretty shocked that he was just there was a lot in there about, he was very, what's the word? You put it really well, and I can't think of what it was, but
I don't know.
He could be kind of crude, and
yeah, he was crass for sure.
And there was a lot of sexual stuff in it. I'll just say that.
Half of it at a minimum.
Almost half of the show was about that. Yeah. But one thing I found very interesting is he was talking about being a young boy and how much like he turned to porn to fulfill that need, because when you're young and you're a boy, you have all these hormones and like you have to do something about it.
And men are visual.
Right. And I think this is a lot of young men. And so they're turning to porn to relieve that need, right? But young women are not looking at that, and we're not seeing what they're seeing. And so they're coming with this view that they've had from that of how sex should be. And women are looking at it like it's a love thing. Mm-hmm. And so it just really hit me kind of watching that, like, wow, there really is a totally different perspective that we don't really realize about our spouse when we're in the marriage. That we are really coming from 2 totally different places, and that shaping how men see how it's going to be is a big deal. And I think it's something we need to be more aware of, because it's really out there. I mean, and in this world of internet and social media and everything, like, mm-hmm. It's really in their face.
Very accessible.
Right. To where my daughter has even said, boys have shown it to her at school, where they're showing it to the
Showed it
girls.
to the whole
where
classroom.
we never did. We didn't have that. I mean, boys had to look at magazines and stuff or
VHS tape.
tapes to see that.
Yeah.
But now it's everywhere. So this is definitely going to affect the next generation even more so, because it's more available, more in your face, and that this is going to be an expectation in marriages. And how are we going to deal with that?
Well, I think that leads us perfectly to our next point. So we talked about that. You got to recognize expectations you have for yourself and expectations you have on your spouse. And where those expectations between you and your spouse are different, you need to calibrate with each other. You need to compromise with each other, and you need to communicate with each other to make sure that you can reach a happy medium. But we really want to talk about next. So what happens if you don't, though? What are the dangers of the unmet expectations that go unsaid, that lead to disappointment, that lead to anger, that lead to resentment, that lead to this huge, huge divide in your relationship? The divide that you think happens overnight, but has really happened over the course of an extended period as these expectations weren't met and have led to these resentments. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think you can build some self-awareness on what they are, but it's hard sometimes to have these conversations with your spouse, and even harder to reach a compromise with your spouse. So it's super important to understand what happens if you don't have these things moving forward. So, and Steph, so you want to jump in here and think about these things that we think our spouse is trying to do these things on purpose sometimes, right? Like, they don't want to have sex with me. Like, they don't find me appealing anymore. Like, why aren't they doing that? And you start to just spin out of control, man. And we got to get outside of our own freaking heads sometimes and start realizing that things that our spouse doesn't mean that they're out to get us. They're not trying to purposefully hurt us. They're just living their own experience in the moment with their own expectations.
Yes. So we want to tell you about the danger of these unmet expectations, where we're saying like this leads to the disappointment and anger and resentment. And this is where it builds, because sometimes we're holding these expectations, not even realizing that we have an expectation. That's why I call it the silent killer, because most of the time we're not even aware that we had an expectation, or we have it, but it's never been spoken out loud. It's just been, it's called an expectation because you're expecting something.
Well, we're just pissed. We don't even really understand why we're pissed in those moments, right? We're just pissed and upset and defensive because our spouse isn't meeting our need, but we're not sitting back and seeing the forest through the trees and saying, shit, I got this expectation that I didn't even realize that I had of my spouse.
Right. So like, I'm just going to go back for a second and say, like, when we, not go back, but this is kind of a way to take that example we just talked about with the sex. Like, so say Walt is thinking, so he's thinking he's waiting that this is going to happen, and it doesn't. And I don't even know that he's expecting that in that way. Like, I know he is, but not to that level, right? So he keeps getting disappointed over and over when it doesn't happen. And then he starts to think, well, if you're not going to do that, then I'm not going to do this for you. And that's how this crazy cycle starts, and these resentments start building, is because someone's having an expectation that's not being met, and then they will purposely try to hurt the other person because their need is not being met. And they want to make it to where you will feel your need not being met so that you'll get the point, right? But then we just get into this negative, crazy cycle, and we just keep doing that to each other. And next thing you know, you're on the brink of divorce, or you're getting a divorce, because the expectation was there. You didn't talk about it. You didn't communicate about it. You just kept getting hurt and hurt and hurt over and over. And then at some point, you're just like, this just isn't working for me. And that's why we say it ends up, the expectations are resentments waiting to happen. And those resentments are the silent killer. Because most of the time, we don't even realize we have the expectation. So I'm just going to say also, just to give you guys an example, because I always think the examples are just a really good illustration of so you can understand what we mean by this. And because I think this happens in a lot of relationships, not just ours, but I'm going to use ours. So again, when we had the kids, I stayed at home with the kids all day and he went to work. He had an expectation that he was going to come home to a home cooked meal and we're running to greet him and hug him and say how much we missed him and thanks for going to work. He gets home, dinner's not done. Kids are running around crazy. It's, it's chaos in the house. And he's like, oh my God, like I had this long day at work. I'm coming home to this. Like, and then he's like he's hangry. He's hungry from, he's been up since 6:30 and where's my dinner? And he starts, and then I'm run ragged from the kids. I'm trying to cook dinner. They're pulling on me. I gotta get him in the bath because I gotta get him to bed. Dishes are still sitting in the sink. He's in there chilling, watching TV. I'm giving them a bath thinking like, why isn't he helping out with any of this? He could be doing the dishes. He could be giving them a bath. Like, that's teamwork here, but no, I'm doing it. And
there's expectations smeared all over the house. It's like confetti of expectations everywhere. That blows up and expectations are just coming down on everybody.
And meanwhile, now we actually get the kids to bed and we can actually have some time, but now we're feeling angry from what's not our expectations not being met there. So we're not having quality time. Not to mention the kids are still getting up. And then it's time to go to bed and he's waiting for, what to happen. Well, I'm thinking like, you just didn't help me with the thing. And I'm not really in the mood for that. He's still got a physiological need. Me emotionally, now I don't want to because I'm feeling upset about how he didn't help me. Mm-hmm. And this is the cycle we get in. And this happens repeatedly, day after day. And before you know it, we're both super resentful. We're both like, I'm not helping you because you didn't do what I wanted. And this is how it happens. And I know this is happening in lots of households. Mm-hmm. And this is why I think expectations is one of the biggest topics for marriage.
When I think to that point, because you covered it really good. And we're being kind of funny about it too, guys, and serious at the same time, because this is just real. This is why relationships are damn hard. This is why it's difficult to really be happy sometimes, is because you're kind of making each other mad and you don't even know why. But I think there's also one more key point to this. It's not just always your spouse. You also have to watch, if you don't feel like you're meeting expectations for what you think you should be doing in life, sometimes that comes with guilt and shame. And sometimes you'll pull away from your spouse. So you also have to recognize those times when you're pulling away from your spouse, but it's because you have these unrealistic expectations on yourself, and that's causing some internal struggle. So one, you can move past that. Two, you can have a conversation with your spouse so that they don't feel like there's something else happening that isn't really happening there. They don't feel like you're not meeting my expectations right now. And now you're pulling away. And now I'm thinking all this stuff is happening when really it's just your own internal struggle and fight you're having in that season. So this is why the danger of unmet expectations, well, like you said, is that slipper, bam, we're divorced. And people are like, what the hell happened to you guys? I don't even really know. They were different than the person than we started dating. And they just didn't even care what I thought anymore. They didn't meet any of my needs anymore, when really you guys weren't meeting each other's needs in the first place.
But it wasn't talked about. You just held in that anger, held in that resentment, and you both can feel it in the way, but nobody's really voicing it. And you just continue on like that. And I have to tell you, even on the personal side, like I had a lot of guilt for myself. Like I think I had expectations of myself and the type of mother I would be. And I felt like I was falling short of that also, and failing as a wife and a mother. So there was a lot of that happening in there too, because I could feel that he had this expectation that I wasn't meeting. And that made me have feelings of failure. And also, when I couldn't soothe my child or, those type of things, that was making me feel like I was failing as a mom. And so all of that stuff was adding to that emotional stuff that, goes with the expectations. Like, so when we say it's not just expectations of yourself, it's expectations of yourself too. When you feel like you're not reaching your own expectations.
Right. Okay. So now we're going to talk about what do you do about it? Because that's a really great point, is that internal and external struggle and pressures and all the things that all the emotions we feel as human beings, which make it great to be a human being, also makes it hard to be a human being. We talked about first, you got to recognize expectations for you and your spouse. Second thing we talked about is what are the dangers of unmet expectations so that you can build a self-awareness to really understand, man, if I don't do something different to get a different result, I'm going to stay in this insane cycle with my spouse and we're going to ultimately not work out. And that's not the goal any of us have. And so the third point is we're going to talk about how do you actually handle these expectations. And I think the first thing you need to do is 99 times out of 100, your spouse means well. They want to make you happy. They want to do things that you like. We allow anger and resentment to get in the way of that sometimes, and disappointments and pain and shame and all these things. But if you always think your spouse means well, even when they don't show up as such, you're going to be able to respond when they trigger you, and you're going to be able to respond versus react to the emotion that you have. And then you got to ask yourself, hey, are my expectations that I have of my spouse unrealistic? Am I even doing what I expect from my spouse for them?
Right.
And am I setting myself up in my marriage for failure because I'm not even willing to compromise with what we're going to do next? Because my expectations are so high that they're never going to meet them. And Stephanie, and for me, I have a lot of really high expectations of myself. And sometimes I wouldn't meet those expectations. I'd be mad at myself. But I had a lot of success because of this part of my personality. The reality was, because I held myself to such a high standard, I would do the same for those people around me, including you. And I would cause a lot of hurt trying to push somebody to be their best version of themselves when maybe they already thought that they were, or their best version didn't look like my best version, because my best version had my own selfish interest involved in that. And you've told me before, and you haven't said this in a long time, thank God, but you would tell me back then, I feel like I'm never going to be good enough for you. And look, if your spouse has ever told you that, you guys, it's time to do some self-reflection and what your expectations you're levying on your spouse are, and whether or not those are unrealistic. And if they're unrealistic, you need to throttle that back, and you need to approach this from a little bit of a different way. And I think then you got to communicate, which is what you're going to talk about now.
Yeah, you guys, I think the biggest way to combat these expectations in your marriage is to communicate. This is why the communication is so important. If you don't communicate these things to your spouse and let them know that you're feeling this way, because they can't read your mind, then this is what's going to happen. You're just going to constantly have this disappointment happening that builds up into the resentment. So I know Walt and I, we had that come to Jesus moment, and we started to do a lot more communicating. We started to talk a lot more about, as soon as we started to feel, maybe not as soon, but a lot sooner, we would communicate that frustration. If it started to feel like it was happening often, then we would have a talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I would bring it to him, or he would bring it to me and say, hey, I'm just kind of feeling this way. And we'd have a talk about it. And a lot of the times that was very fruitful, and we would make changes based on whatever that was. We would start to make changes towards it. And I think as long as your spouse sees, like, for one, that you communicated it, for two, if they see that you're at least making an attempt to be better about it, that goes a long way. You're not going to be perfect, and it's not going to change immediately. They can't expect that. That's an unrealistic expectation. But
Yeah.
seeing you try means a lot. And if you keep trying, it's going to get better. So this is some of the, but also, so communicate with the goal of mutual understanding and compromise. So
Compromise being the
seek
biggest
to
one.
understand first. That's so important. You have to seek to understand. Don't go into it immediately thinking like how you're going to respond, or that you're just going to shut them down. You're not willing to listen. If you're not willing to listen, it's never going to go anywhere. There's no point in communicating. There's no point in having a talk, because it's useless. So you have to be willing to listen to your partner. If they're coming to you with a need, or they're coming to you with a feeling of resentment, and they're letting you know that, you need to listen and seek to understand. I know we just had an argument recently where I finally kind of realized a different way to say something to him, because we get to where we're just talking at each other and nobody's
Right.
listening. And I said to him, like, okay, I'm really trying to understand you. And then I would say what I think he's saying. And if that wasn't right, then he can let me know, no, that's not what I'm saying. And if it isn't, he can say, yeah, that's it.
That's that speaker listener technique that we talked to you guys about in, I think it was episode 40 or 41 in the communication episode that we did.
Yeah. Sometimes you really just have to be like, help me understand this, because I'm not understanding what you're saying. Like, we're seeing this from two totally different points of view, and I just can't understand you. And even if you can't, then at least say that. Then at least they know you're not getting it.
Well, that really is communicating with the goal of mutual understanding. That's what communicating with the goal of mutual understanding looks like in real life. And we still have to do this, guys. And you know what I found over the years is you're either working on your marriage or you're working on your divorce. I don't think there's any real middle ground. And so with the tools we're giving you guys today, you have a choice now that you've got some self-awareness behind it. Do you allow those expectations to lead to resentments that are going to ultimately lead to divorce? Or do you make the choice today to have an honest conversation with your spouse about what you hope and what you desire, and be willing to reach a compromise that works for the team so that the team is winning? It's not just my way or the highway. If you're willing to do those things, you're going to accelerate the positive parts of your marriage extraordinarily quick. And you're going to start to find that happiness you're finding within each other and within your relationship changes dynamically from where it's sitting at maybe today, because we've lived this journey too. And I think that, there's one more piece. I know we really want a bonus, we always like a little bonus action going for you right here about what you can really do and what you can think too.
It's funny. This comes up a lot too. We say this all the time. Gratitude. Gratitude goes so far. You can't be in, what was it you said? Gratitude and resentment at the same time?
Mm-hmm. You can't be angry and full of gratitude. Doesn't work.
Those two things are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, they really are.
They don't work together. If you're recognizing what your spouse does well, and you're appreciating what they do for you, and you're seeing the good things that they do instead of focusing on that one thing that's driving you crazy, you're bound to see them in a different light. I mean, the gratitude goes a long way, because if you're appreciating them, you're not going to be focusing on what they're not doing. You're focusing on what they are doing. And oh God, Walt and I can totally speak to this, that how transformative that is. So take the magnifying glass off your partner and turn the mirror on yourself, and really ask yourself, am I doing the things to be a good spouse? Am I being a good spouse? And you really have to ask yourself and be true to yourself in that answer. Because if you're really asking yourself that, I'm sure you're going to see some areas where you're not showing up well and you could improve. And part of that is being grateful for your partner and what they do for you. And, Walt and I, like, we come back to this a lot often in ourselves. We have to catch ourselves being like, okay, I'm being focused on the wrong thing. He did a lot of really nice things for me today, or he really helps me a lot. I need to stop worrying about that one thing and stop ourselves. We have to stop and be like, okay, I need to have a different perspective. I need to look at this differently. And it's all intention, you guys. Everything is intentional.
Yep.
And that's why it's hard, because it takes work to be intentional.
Yeah, that's the dang truth. So look, guys, we're going to wrap up. The challenge for you over the next week, I want you to stop expecting and start being thankful. And I want you to voice what you're thankful for every single day. not only to yourself, but I want you to do it to your spouse. And I want you to do that for 1 week. And then I want you to evaluate how your relationship with yourself and your spouse has changed and what level of happiness has come with that, because it will dynamically be different than where it's at right this second. And so, look, as always, don't forget to join our Legacy Driven Marriage Facebook group. We're building a community of people in the arena fighting for their relationship. You want to be part of that community and you want to get in before it gets too big. And it's about support, and it's about being with people with the mentality of making their marriage be extraordinary, not even just making it work. So share this episode with your friends. Join us over there on the Legacy Driven Marriages Facebook group. Check out our website at legacydrivenmarriages.com. And as always, and we've been getting a lot of this, drop us a line on what you would like us to talk about. That makes our job a little bit easier on forming these things out. So look, guys, until the next time,
get into the arena of your marriage, keep fighting for your relationship, and keep elevating your generational legacy. And we'll see you guys next Tuesday.